Is there a doctor in the house?
Doctor, you have a visitor in the main lobby.
Show where we get to talk about the things every executive is talking about. I'm your host, Steve the Dr. Meek, and the doctor is in. Today we're tackling arguably the top tool that every executive uses daily, but it's still something of a mystery to them. And to help us with that is our guest today, David Setzer, a founder and CEO of Mailprotector. Welcome, David. How are you doing today?
Hey, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome. Great to be with you, Steve.
Awesome. Well, since you're here, why don't you tell our audience just a little bit about you so they understand why you're this bringer of wisdom to them.
Bringer of wisdom. Now you may have imparted something on me that an expectation that may be too much, but
bar too high.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll let everybody else be the judge of it by the time we finish talking this today. Yeah. So, quick, long story short, I've been in the small business arena my entire life. My folks started in the early 70s. My wife and I have been coaching and mentoring entrepreneurs in former communist Eastern Europe for 30 plus years. Started a extranet development company back in right at the .com crash in 2000, and we quickly pivoted as we managed a lot of email at the time, quickly pivoted to the product, now the business, which is Mailprotector. So we've been in the email security business for almost 25 years now. And our goal is helping people use this amazing technology of email to move our world forward. It's an awesome technology. It was created to do an awesome thing. I think it's on the order of, honestly, the printing press or the telegraph wire, but it has become a chore to be managed and a threat to be feared. And our goal is to eliminate that and return it back to what it was meant to be.
I still remember the days of the inter-office memo and the orange envelopes. You kind of had to send copies to everyone. And, people don't realize how disruptive email was, when it finally came to be.
It was huge. When we first started going to Eastern Europe, our older kids were young at the time, and I would leave. I'd go for a week or two at a time, and I would call home for maybe 15, 20 minutes a week because it was $10 a minute to call home. And when we talked with folks over there, we were ecstatic to have fax machines. So, when the faxes kind of started becoming ubiquitous, we could write letters out and fax them back and forth because that was a lot cheaper. It wasn't, till probably the mid-ish, late mid 90s that we could even start emailing them back and forth. And then the concept of no cost communication to that part of the world was just unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine, for technology, something, we just both had great statements about email, but email is kind of like that, I don't know how I imagine a crazy ex-spouse would be now. It went from being everything's perfect, my best friend, and I don't know how I get through the day without you, to all of a sudden going, what the heck is going on? So with that, why don't we just...
I don't know if I've heard that analogy before, but I might use it from now on. We'll see. I don't have one.
Well, you know what happens at the podcast stays at the podcast.
Yeah.
Unless it sticks, then we can use it anywhere. No, sometimes when I'm sitting down with people and chatting, I have these crazy epiphanies. I'm a very tangential thinker, and the one thing makes me think of something else for absolutely no reason whatsoever.
We'll see.
But let's get into the numbers.
Like a Rorschach.
This is a doctor's visit. I don't want to be kicked out as a physician, so I'd be hesitant and remiss if I didn't ask for the pulse. Starting by the numbers, what's in your mind? What's the kind of current state of the market related to email?
Yeah. So back to the technology, like I said, it's really a world-changing technology. If you think about what it is and what it was designed for and what it's done, it's one we take for granted because immediate communication is kind of the norm, but it's still, and And this is important to understand the difference, dive too technically, but to understand just what email is. Email is actually the expression of an internet protocol called the SMTP protocol. That stands for the Simple Mail Transport Protocol. And it was created for a different world. It was created for the ARPANET. But the main difference between email and Teams or Slack or FaceTime or any of these technologies that we can use to communicate is by being a core fundamental protocol, email is not owned by anyone. So it's not an application that any entity or any government or any business controls. And that's what makes it so ubiquitous and so powerful. I can communicate with a prospect in Sydney or a partner in Sao Paulo or a colleague in Prague, my ninth grade daughter's English teacher. It really has become our online identity. It's funny, one of the presentations I do, I look at the technology press, and the first article I have, email is dead, and that was 2004. And it makes good tech press, but it has only become more important over the years. And what that's led to today is that 90% of cyber attacks use email as their prime attack vector. So, if we were talking 10 years ago, this figure would have been more like 50 to 60%. So, 90% of our attacks come or use email as the prime vector. What it means is we have to be vigilant about that security. The other real kind of factor in the market, I guess you would say, is on our latest FBI stats, what we're seeing is the amount of ransomware payment has actually gone down a little bit. But the other way around, the ransomware payments have gone up as they continue to rise, but the average payment has gone down. What that means is, and what we see is, enterprises are hardening themselves. They're spending a lot of money on cybersecurity. But SMBs that are struggling more to understand the threat aren't able, they're not spending as much. So you're seeing more and more attacks on small and medium-sized businesses. That's why you're seeing smaller payments, even though the total amount is going up.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation, just understanding, actually looking at the numbers and not thinking, hey, we're doing better. We are doing better, but we're doing better at the top end. And it's kind of pushing the activity down to the lower tier, the, sub 1,000, sub 100 kinds of organizations.
Exactly, 100%.
So in your efforts, are you seeing email-borne attacks? Are you actually part of any of the incidents where you're part of the remediation or coming back from whatever's going on?
Yeah, so we've got I guess it's more than a saying, kind of a principle in the cybersecurity space. We call it right of boom and left of boom. And basically boom is when the attack happens. Email security is primarily a left of boom or a pre-attack defense. If you want to think about it in physical terms, think about, email security is the lock on the gate on your fence or the lock on your front door. Whereas maybe backup and disaster recovery are the people that come in or maybe your insurance company that comes in and, replaces all the things that were stolen. So email is primarily a pre-attack fact or building block in a cybersecurity strategy. We do forensics, we do some reporting, and we help folks that clean up and remediate on the after the fact side. But from an email security side, it's primarily an attack preventer, not an attack recovery product.
Gotcha. And as far as the situations that you run into, are you finding that the activity is higher or things are changing? Is something driving, I guess, kind of the inertia that mail-borne attacks are having other than the ubiquitousness of it?
That's a really good question because I think it goes to some perception, especially in the SMB space, because sometimes there's a perception that email attacks are, some, guy in his parents' basement somewhere or somebody in Eastern Europe, hacking away at 2:00 in the morning or Southeast Asia, and they're just kind of random. And it's important for any business owner or anybody who's responsible to understand just what the threat they're facing is, because in the digital world, you can't see it. You walk down a dangerous street and you see like, oh, wait a minute, everybody's got fences and barbed wire and bars on their windows. You're like, oh, maybe this is a dangerous neighborhood. Because this is digital, you can't see it. And what a lot of folks don't see if they're not in this space and don't understand is just how sophisticated the adversary is. Phishing and email attacks and ransomware are a highly sophisticated business mostly in Eastern Europe, or even farther than kind of central, and a lot of Southeast Asia. It involves, in some places, forced labor. They have large facilities. They have multi-tiered, I can tell you this, the sophistication of the business entity of the bad guys is more sophisticated than the majority of businesses in our country. They have their coders and developers. They have basically their lead generators. They have their closers. They have their finance team. It is a highly tuned operation. I guess I wasn't, of course, around then read some books on it, but it was akin to, what organized crime was during Prohibition. So just because you don't see the enemy doesn't mean they're not very sophisticated. And I think, to your question, that is what is driving the ubiquity of attacks today, especially with AI. A lot of folks kind of taken well, we're small, nobody's going to notice us mindset. Well, that is one of the most dangerous mindsets you can have, because especially with AI, what is phenomenal at picking out signals in noise, it becomes very, very easy to find vulnerable organizations. And if you think about, if again, back to the physical terms, it's kind of like, hey, that alarm system is not going to prevent somebody from breaking into your house. I said, no, it's not, but it's going to make me a less attractive target than my neighbor across the street who doesn't have one.
Gotcha.
And that legitimately is the same principle at work in the digital space.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That it's not just business; it's big business, and on that side of the world, the cost of living is dramatically different. So what we see is $1,000, $1 million, whatever, it's exponentially greater given, the part of the world that they live in. And, that's like finding the golden goose. It's akin to a gold rush. It's just, it's in the cybersecurity world where everybody's rushing in to start a business and become a crypto miner. No, that's probably not right.
No. Well, crypto has facilitated a large portion of it, because what crypto has done now facilitates anonymous payment, anonymous transactions.
Yeah, you can't have ransomware without cryptocurrency.
Exactly. And another, you may speak to this in a minute, but another dangerous mentality that we hear a lot of times from our partners, small business, is we're small. Our data's not our information's not valuable to anyone. So we're not a target for an attack. And again, let's go back to, physical example. If I can kind of come up with the right analogy here, it's, hey, somebody breaks in your house and, all right, they don't have a TV, a computer, a watch they can steal, but there's my grandfather's memorabilia from when he fought in World War II and his medals and everything else. Well, they're going to steal that, because in this world, they can ransom it back to you. So the principle is, the data doesn't have to be valuable to them. The question is it valuable to you? And if it's valuable to you, then you're a target.
That's so important. I like your point about, it's not so much about feeling like you're the threat, that in a lot of cases, hackers are just, they're just being opportunistic. Who's easy? Who's easy? Where can I get in? And then let me figure out what's of value, or let me make some guesses about what's of value, as long as I can get in. It's the proverbial, I don't have to be faster than the bear. I just want to be faster than you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's sad, but that absolutely drives the economics. And that's the whole thing you got to look at here is what are the economics of the problem? And that drives it completely.
Yeah, I read an article at some point in the past about this ransomware operator who was mad that they had encrypted somebody. The person made the payment, and then I guess whoever was trying to decrypt ran into some issues. That after that, they kind of started like a tech support IT department for people running into issues decrypting, because they knew if people couldn't decrypt after making payment, then they wouldn't make payments anymore.
Exactly.
And it's just that it's that business mindset of,
Yeah.
wait, that's going to impact my revenues.
That's great.
I need to be
No,
better.
they have tech support too. We actually, there's some sad stories. The operations, especially in Southeast Asia, you'll see where mostly Chinese nationals will be lured to work in places like Laos, Cambodia, some of those countries. And we've seen the satellite images of large facilities with cafeterias, dormitories, workstations. So they'll be, kind of lured to work there and then have their passports taken and literally be forced labor. And they'll be working 12, 14, 16 hours a day in a really sophisticated organization. To your point, in the tech support, because you paid your ransom, they want to make sure you get your data decrypted so that when it happens, the story you tell is that, I paid and I got my data back. Now, the sad thing is, or not sad, sometimes the funny thing is we've seen them give advice on what to do not to have that happen again. But then the sad thing is we have seen sometimes companies, the same organization, get hit 2 and 3 times.
Yeah.
Because they think, I've been hit once, so they're not going to come back. Like, nope, if you keep leaving your doors unlocked, they're going to keep coming back.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, that once you're a victim, I can't remember the number, but there's a high percentage probability that you're going to become a victim a second time. I don't know if that's the predisposition to not make changes or do anything else or learn the lesson, or maybe the attacker leaves something behind to make it a little bit easier to get in. But regardless, it's going to happen. If it does happen, it's going to happen more than the other guy.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a bit about the heart rate. What performance metric tells a little bit of the story for you right now?
Performance metric in the sense, organizational protection, or kind of market wise?
Either way, it's open-ended, just to kind of spawn conversation.
So one thing that we look at is, from a performance side, and it's primarily phishing, whether it's generic phishing, spear phishing, whaling, lots of different types of the same threat, is how we're doing on those threats getting through, how we're doing on any of our partners. And we go to market, deliver our service through managed service providers to primarily SMB and organizations up to, say, 4,000 or 5,000 users, but some down to 1 or 2 users. So we look at any of them that have been breached through our product, and that number is, I don't want to say 0. I'll just, because you never want to make that claim. I'll say it's almost non-existent. And that's probably the most important number for us, because our goal is protecting these companies and these organizations. It's easy for a company to be kind of this nameless, faceless brand or whatever, but most of these folks are like us, like how we grew up. They're small and medium-sized business. They're doing great things in their community. They're providing great products and services. People have jobs and they're feeding their families. So they're doing great stuff, and we look at our job to protect them. So we look at anything that might compromise that protection from our side. So that's probably the most important metric to us. And I'll say, like I said, I don't want to say 0, but it's close to non-existent.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's got to be, it's so good, it's almost bad, because you want to say where you're at and how things are, but you don't want to.
Yeah. I'll say the other challenge the whole IT space, and especially the security space, faces, it's kind of like when it works, nothing happens. Like when everything's working well, nothing happens. I guess that'd be akin to something like maybe an insurance policy, even though it's not really the same thing. It's kind of like you pay your premiums every month and you never have a wreck, or you never have anything stolen or anything, and nothing happens. You just kind of don't notice it.
That's always the challenge. And I think with every security tool, is just because somebody's been lucky for 3 years and hasn't had an attack, or hasn't fallen victim to some sort of threat, they're going to go another 5 years. You don't know, but just the ongoing need to continually add security tools, and for some organizations, they are unfortunately out in the middle of everything, and they may not be large, but maybe they're connected, or part of big networks where they fall under the radar, or they're just happen to be so connected they get attacked.
Yeah. No, I think there's a name for that phenomenon or that principle or way of thinking. I can't think of what it is, but it basically is just because something has been is thinking that it always will be, which is not the case.
Yeah, I think I read this book on, it was all about cognitive biases, kind of
Yeah.
an analysis of the brain and how we believe and what our brain does to do things. And they had all kinds of things in there. That was a really interesting read. Now, we've talked mainly about ransomware attacks, but for you saying that, a very small number of your users fallen victim to spear phishing, how does that impact like business email compromise types of numbers?
Yeah, well, we actually don't have any BEC that we know of that have come through us. I'll give you two examples of two organizations, and this is how attacks can happen. Two organizations that were not using our products. One is through a CEO forum I'm a part of, and the other one is through another relationship. One was the CFO of an FBO. And I'll try to make this as anonymous as possible. I'll just say this CFO received an email that basically said, hey, excited that our sales teams have worked out the deal. We do have somebody else interested in this aircraft. To make sure that you guys are locked in on it, you need to go ahead and send a $250,000 deposit. Here's all of our bank information in Zurich. And this was a few years back, maybe when there was a little less suspicion. And this FBO, it's not a huge company. It was 45 employees, but they're having the conversations. This is legit. It's from the broker, it's from the seller. Everything's good. So, hey, sales team and the procurement team wrapped this conversation up yesterday. Get this message today. Good to go. Get in the bank, get in the SWIFT network, send the wire, and $250,000 is gone in the snap of the fingers. The other one, which is more recent, this is just in the last couple of months. I'll, again, got to make sure I anonymize this.
Sure.
It was, I'll just say somebody in the construction space.
Okay.
They were breached, but it wasn't a ransomware attack. What happened was the bad guys sent out invoices to this company's customers with wiring instructions. So basically, hey, here's the invoice, here's your wire instructions. So the target of the breach really was not affected in the sense that their data wasn't encrypted, they weren't ransomed, and they didn't get impersonated, any impersonated traffic trying to get them to send money. It was their customers that got it. And this was I will say, a larger company that dealt in the hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars, on their invoices. So what we're seeing is the sophistication in the bad guys to know, I could score a one win here by this breach, or with this breach, I could score 20 wins by emailing to their customers.
Wow. That's a little scary to think about, just the evolving tactics. And, I'm trying to think about how, you can protect yourself, but you also need to have your entire supply chain protected with the same tools to, make sure you and your customers are all protected.
Exactly.
Well, I know that, CIS and NIST and some other organizations added supply chain risk to their frameworks and stuff in recent years, just trying to help account for that. So, hopefully all organizations, as we kind of deal with all the different threats and things out there, are trying to find, ways to lock it up end to end, and everybody working together, swimming in the same way towards the same goal, just kind of makes it a little bit better for all of us. If we make the cost of doing business prohibitive to them, then maybe some of them will not so many will pop up. Yeah.
We have to change the economics, as I say, in our space. I won't get into the underlying tech, but the email security industry for a long time has fought the wrong side of asymmetric warfare. And to be fair, a lot of the cybersecurity industry. And that's why we believe the principle of zero trust is really the only way to solve this problem. They've been lobbing, $50 mortars over the wall, and we're shooting them down with $1 million missiles. So we think that the right solution is having sophisticated, targeted defenses in the right spots in a very concentrated way, and that can provide the vast majority of protection that an organization needs.
That's awesome. So where did was there a particular inspirational moment where this zero trust email system came from? It's just so vastly different than like you said, asymmetric methods out there today.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
It actually came from, gosh, probably my CTO and I, probably a decade of conversations, just knowing that, just always feeling reactive. Like, I mean, frankly, it's a battle. It's the bad guys versus the good guys. And we'd always have to react to situations. And we said, how do we solve this problem once and for all? Zero trust is a concept. I mean, it's pretty obvious just by the name, but it's a concept that dates back to the beginning of cybersecurity in the 1980s with firewalls. We looked at email. Email was created for the ARPANET, or SMTP was, and it was created as an open protocol because the ARPANET in the 70s was a closed network. So you had to have permission to get on the network. So they created the inbox free and open. And so the principle of email security has always been taking the underlying SMTP protocol principle, which is everything is good. And then email security traditionally says, let's figure out what's bad. So we said, how do we apply zero trust to flip that whole model on its head and say, instead of trying to figure out what's bad, let's assume everything's bad and figure out what's good. There's two technologies that it took to do that without diving in too deep. But basically, we already see the email flowing in and out. We also need to see the behavior at rest, which is through an API into the actual 365 or Google Workspace inbox. We need to see what the user's doing as they interact and as they move messages around. And then also we need to be able to apply AI to user behavior. AI is not economically viable to apply to email security. Anybody that says that they're doing it, that they're scanning all of your email with AI, they're either lying to you or they've got an economic model that's going to require them to 1,000x their price or go out of business. But we don't have the compute power to apply AI to every email that comes through. But where you can apply it is behaviorally. So we apply AI to look at user behavior as they manage their email inbox. And we've got some very targeted models that make very specific decisions. But we create these custom neural networks for every individual. Those two technologies, like zero trust, was actually super easy to apply decades ago.
Sure.
It would make email unusable. So the whole point is it's got to be something that's usable. You could put a bank vault on everybody's front door and they never could get in. So you got to have something usable. So being able to see the inbox and then be able to apply AI in the proper way are the two technologies, capabilities, probably just in the last really 3 years, that have made the deployment of zero trust in the email space possible.
That's awesome. It's good to get a sense of how that works behind the scenes a little bit. Partially to gauge the tools, but not just email security, but as it applies to other things, and in our own operations as well. Because every conversation, whether it's about technology or business or whatever, has some, in my head, being a tangential thinker, as I mentioned earlier, gives me some insight into applying to other things as well.
Absolutely. Completely agree with that.
Now, the last metric I have for you today is just, I call it the weight. And I think of weight as kind of more of a strategic thing. What you decide to do, taking a step back, thinking about things, what would you say your top weight statistic is?
Oh, I don't know the exact statistic. Let's call it a mindset more than a statistic if we can.
Okay.
And it's a dangerous mindset that we see in SMBs because we hear it from our MSP partners that sometimes they'll say, well, we need to sell them this, meaning a cybersecurity product or a cybersecurity capability. And I appreciate I love the name of your podcast too and kind of how you're walking through it, because the example or analogy I use, it's like when I go into the doctor's office and they say, oh, yep, you got a sinus infection. And, here's a prescription for some amoxicillin or some antibiotic. I don't I'm not sure that's really in the budget today. My doctor's like, okay, well, do you want the amoxicillin or do you want the antibiotic? or the sinus infection. Like, you pick. So it's kind of a mentality that we may buy this security and we may not buy that security. And I get it. Hey, business owners, it's your business. It's your right to do what you want to and what you don't want to. But for MSPs and business owners, the mindset I would say is look at each other as partners in business. The MSP is there not just to sell you technology. They're there to help you solve business problems with technology. And part of that is keeping your business safe. So the safest businesses that we see are the ones that have MSPs that say, hey, we've spent a whole lot of expertise on crafting and choosing, selecting, building, and crafting this cybersecurity framework through products and processes and implementation. This is the framework we're going to deploy. If it's not if it's not what you think is right to protect your business, then you might need to find another IT partner. So I would say to business owners out there, find the IT provider that you trust to be an expert. And I know sometimes it's hard. Hey, we're not lawyers, we're not doctors. How do we know if it's a good lawyer, a good doctor, or an IT person? There's ways to do that. Figure it out in the communities, referrals. You can do it. And then trust that person. Trust that provider to do the job that you're paying them to do. They're a professional. It's what they do all day, every day. Don't try to nickel and dime it, to be honest. It's the old, penny wise, pound foolish kind of thing. Does that, more of a mentality, is that kind of make sense?
Yeah, if I'm getting a sense of what you're saying, it's, for the typical small business executive, whoever they are, that, stuff just doesn't go away. The cyber risk is just like every other risk in your business, whether it's staffing or OSHA or whatever else. And there's always competing things of risk that you've got to be mindful of. So you may not have budget for one or may save budget for the other, but that doesn't mean it goes away. You still have to be mindful of it and pay attention to it. Yeah. And, try and have strategies for how you abate all the different risks that are facing your organizations. And one of those things is having a trusted partner that you can go to for advice on the things that are cyber related.
Yeah. I mean, we've got accountants that we trust with our accounting, with our taxes. We've got lawyers that we trust with our contracts and our policies, in our personal lives, that we got doctors and providers that we trust with our health care. Your MSP, your IT partner, is the provider that you should trust, with your technology.
And honestly, that's really how I got the nickname The Doctor over the years is, just growing up in the early days, the heydays of IT, the Novell shops, whatever was going on. If you're a Novell shop and a client's trying to network, Novell's the easy answer. If you suddenly get into Office 365 and somebody's talking about stuff, all of a sudden Office 365 is the answer. And I had a habit of saying that, before I make any recommendations, I want to understand what's going on like a doctor. So let's get some statistics. Let's gather some information. Let's take a snapshot of where you are. Let's find out more about your business. And then I can make reservations. So many times over the years, I'd have an organization come to me and go, hey, we need a server. I'm like, okay. Well, we sell lots of servers. I got blue servers, green servers, red servers, big servers, tall servers, flat servers, server farms. I got all kinds of servers. But before I just sell you a server, let me understand what you're after and why. And it's been amazing over the years, just the number of times where it turned out that, well, they didn't actually need a server. They needed something completely different. But if you don't force that conversation, then you're trying to solve a problem that actually, is a different symptom.
Well, that's a perfect example right there of how you find an IT partner or provider that you trust. You're like a contractor. If somebody walks in to give you a bid on a remodel, walks in, looks around, and say it's going to be $50,000, do you trust that one more or less than the one that walks in, looks around, gets the tape measure out, gets their notepad out, writes stuff down, walks around for 30 minutes and says it's going to be, $60,000? Which one do you trust more? The one that actually came in, diagnosed the situation, understood your needs, what you were doing. Like, I think you guys, maybe it would help if you guys all wore like white lab coats or something, when you
I've got
came
mine right here.
in. Yeah, there you go. Okay. Yeah.
So
So
I
we're
even
on
got
the
my
same page.
stethoscope with me.
Yeah. We're on the same page. What you need to do instead of the stethoscope, you need to hang like a network tester or something like that over your neck.
I took some photographs with it, and I had a patch cable. And then I had my stethoscope
There you
against the
go.
laptop.
There you go. That would help the analogy a little bit better.
Did I mention I'm a complete dork? Yeah, that's.
Hey, maybe that's why we get along so well.
Yeah, I'm a tangential thinker that way. Well, what else? I guess as far as from your point of view, in the organizations that that you're talking with, that you're dealing with, I'm sure that there's times where you're having to talk to organizations about what they're still using and why. How do you guys help facilitate that conversation or arm them with the information they need to change their mind about, oh well, stuff's going to happen, but stuff's going to happen.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is one, understanding that, hey, these businesses are out there, doing whatever they're doing, providing value, and they're not in the space that you and I are in every day. So I think it's important to understand that and to educate. My accounting firm, they're in tax law changes every single day. And so sometimes they'll educate us and they'll say, hey, here's what's happening with the R&D expenses and the R&D credits and depreciation of this and how that works. And we trust them to stay on top of it and to educate. So as IT and as cybersecurity providers, I think the most important thing we can do is, one, help educate organizations and the businesses that we serve on a regular basis. We see a lot of our partners do kind of quarterly, they call them, QBRs, quarterly business reviews, or some kind of quarterly or half yearly check-in to say, hey, here's kind of the state of the world. Here's where things are. Here's our recommendations. Here's what we think you need to do and think you need to be doing. But I think the key is educating at the right level and being the true business partner, not the folks that are trying to sell IT. To your point of, oh, all right, here's a red server. I think the worst thing we can do is sell products that businesses don't need, because that violates trust rather than builds trust.
So, from your point of view, when you're explaining to someone, hey, here's Microsoft filtering, or here's here's a typical email filter. Here's how zero trust differs for that. How do you explain for the actual user of the product? How do you explain to them of what does that mean, that zero trust part of things? How does that change their daily, weekly, monthly behavior with their email?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, because that's probably one of the hardest things we face is explaining that. We can explain the benefit pretty easy. How would you like to get what you want and not get what you don't want? Sounds simple,
Yeah.
But then we can dive in and explain the difference between the current deterministic engines and filters versus a probabilistic engine, which is what we've created, and how you apply the zero trust principle to the probabilistic engine. That gets a lot harder to articulate, a lot harder to explain. From the daily interaction, probably the biggest challenge that we face is people have to use their mail a little bit differently, not a lot, call it 10% differently. Okay. But email is a technology that's been around for so long. We've developed these ingrained habits and patterns, and face it, people just don't like change. Period. Yeah, if you're used to, so I can't come up with a good example. Like if you're used to sticking your key in the lock, sometimes it's annoying to have to get your phone out and tap the lock instead. I don't have a good example of that one, but people just don't like change. They don't like to change anything. But when they understand the value from a security standpoint, especially, and we've talked mostly about security, we haven't talked at all about the chore of email. Our goal in our Shield product was not only, we said, if we solve the whole problem, we've actually solved the security problem as well. And the whole problem is you just don't get what you don't want. How do we turn email into a safe environment rather than a chore or a threat? But that explanation is hard. We explain there's a little bit of change in how you use it. Once you get over that hump, and literally it's a few days, it's a week. But man, some people kind of have to be drugged kicking and screaming over it. Honestly, it's one reason that enterprises have become a much more hardened target in the last probably 5 years against cyber attacks is they just mandate it. It's like, hey, this is what we're doing. This is how we do it. And this is what you're going to do. If you don't like it, you don't have a job. And maybe they've got a little more power to be able to do that. But from a security standpoint, it's absolutely paying off for them. So it's a little bit of change, very minimal, but we get ingrained in our ways of doing things.
Well, just the velocity of, I think if you're an executive like me that's had the same mailbox for 20 plus years, just the amount, the volume of stuff that I get into my mailbox, it's been dramatic, the difference in being able to empower me to help myself by choosing where do I want everything to go and stuff. It's such a beat down as an executive come in and know you've got a full day planned of 8 hours of stuff, and it's going to take you 3 to get to your mailbox.
Yeah, I don't think when they invented SMTP and email, they were thinking, all right, everybody's going to need to schedule this in your calendar every day. I mean, that's part of the insanity. My assistant would 15 to 20 minutes a day at minimum was my inbox management. And now since we've deployed Shield, I do it myself in maybe 5 to 10 minutes a week. But yeah, I don't think that's what they were thinking, when they invented the technology.
Yeah, I just remember my daughter's a little bit older now, but I remember her in 8th grade. We were talking about something, and she asked, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm trying to clean up my email." She's like, "Dad, email's dead. People don't use email anymore." I'm like, I've got 1,000 messages today that would beg to differ with that, but I get your point, honey.
Yeah, our kids, we've seen the same thing. And that's as they get older, all of a sudden they start using email a lot more. It's kind of become our online identities.
Yeah, next thing you need to do is come up for something to block Teams messages and Teams chats and everything else. It just seems like everything's so sprawled everywhere now.
Yeah, that's a different conversation. I'll get myself in trouble pretty quickly if we go there. Sorry,
didn't mean to start you down another path.
Yeah.
So give me a sense of how things are changing. How have, with the growth of AI and the use of AI and deepfakes, are you seeing a lot of changes in phishing and email scans or other things?
Yeah, I mean, it used to be phishing especially was super easy to spot because it was bad grammar. It was, malformed formatting, something I learned a few years back. I didn't even know, the English language has an order of adjectives. If we say, the big ugly red building, that sounds normal to us. But if we say the red big ugly building, that sounds like we can't even articulate it, but just it sounds a little off. Yeah. And I didn't even know, we literally have, it's 20 steps long, this order of adjectives. And that was a perfect example of just the subtleties that a lot of times foreign speakers couldn't manage. And so it was really easy to spot. And there was some research that came out right before ChatGPT was even released to the public that showed that AI wrote better phishing messages than humans did. And that was pretty easy to understand if you've seen a lot of them. So One of the biggest changes with AI is that you can't rely on how good something looks anymore. You can't rely on whether it's bad grammar or it looks funny. We see stuff that we catch that never makes it to the users we analyze, and we see stuff that there is no way a person is going to be able to identify it as a fake. Just simple as that. That's probably the biggest change. So I hear you saying there
I'm hearing you saying that today's fish, the grammar is so good that even your English teacher would click it.
There we go.
That was my takeaway from your statement.
I knew as we were in development of this product, I knew we'd crossed a Rubicon because it was before. It was maybe about the time ChatGPT kind of became public. I knew we'd crossed a Rubicon one afternoon. I had 1,000 things going on. It was hectic. A couple things that I was working. I looked at my inbox. I saw a message about something that I'd been thinking about. And I literally came within probably 2 or 3 seconds of clicking on the link. And the normal kind of alarms that would go off in my head, even when something's not obvious, they weren't going off. because I was, tired. I was busy trying to handle a lot of things. And I almost clicked on it. I said, if somebody who's been in this space for 20 years can get fooled, then there's no hope. Like, people are going to get tricked. We've got to solve this problem. And you're right. That's not only your English teacher, but that's about anybody we're seeing is the perfection of it. Now, that's where we can go under the hood. We apply zero trust, and then we can do a whole lot more on the technology side to prevent that. And that's what we're going to have to do. We can't rely on humans to do it. There's a lot we can rely on humans for. They're definitely a layer of the defense, but we can't rely on that anymore.
Yeah, I think just the speed of business is so fast paced. We're dealing with so many things. We've got so much going on. We're wearing so many hats.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so much that maybe we're short of people, but we're short of the right people or whatever else is going on in a typical organization. I think everyone agrees that, staffing today is a challenge to get, everybody doing all the things that you need to do. And one of the reports I used to read, the user risk report, been like 3 years, but the last report I remember reading had this really great statistic in there that said something to the fact that even when people have been through cybersecurity awareness training and know the right things to do, that 40% of the time they get distracted and click a link when they know they shouldn't have. It's kind of like the hacker, the attacker, whoever. They don't need your trust. They just need a moment when you're running late, because that's when their hook looks the most like help. You're more willing to just click it.
Yeah, absolutely. Our oldest daughter, she was in the neurotrauma ICU for a while. Now she's on an oncology NP in the hospital system here. And she'd say, yeah, anytime I don't, I see something I don't like, whatever, I just report it as phishing. Like, well, I'm like, that's not, I'm as a cybersecurity professional, I'm like, oh, it just makes me cringe. I'm thinking, like, that's not what you're supposed to be doing. That's not what that capability is for. And that's why we've never employed it, is because I said, hey, do we want our medical providers saving our lives or figuring out if an email is phishing or not?
Yeah.
Like, let's do our jobs as cybersecurity professionals and protect them, and let them do their jobs and make us healthy.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to your point about usability. In the end, we can lock down everything, but it still needs to be usable. And sometimes from the operational point of view, that's enabling people to be able to just do the work that they should be doing, and not spending their time, looking at emails trying to figure out if it's real or not.
Totally. Completely.
Well, David, we appreciate you spending the day with me, but let's kind of come to an end here. One thing I like to do for my audience is I try to help them understand the main point of our conversation today. So if you're trying to pick that one Davidism, that one thing that you want people to take away from our conversation, what would that be?
Well, you don't want the Davidism, because I grew up with a dad who grew up on a small dairy farm. So I don't know if any of those isms are appropriate for our audience today. But from the main point, I would say, from a IT provider standpoint, is build a smart stack, look where the threats come from. And there's some core products, probably 5 core cybersecurity products. Build that as your core stack, and then put the couple of ancillary ones that you need around it. And then from a business owner's perspective, I'd say the nature of the threat is such that you can't afford not to spend money on security. You put cameras in, you put a security system on your building, you put the doorbell, the Ring doorbells in, like, you spend money on that. Don't nickel and dime cybersecurity. Trust the IT partner that you've chosen to partner with you in your business. Trust their expertise and protect yourself, because it may be a low probability, high impact event, but the probability is getting higher and higher. And what we see is a decent number of businesses actually end up within 2 years of a breach not being in business. Like, this is real. Pay attention to it.
Well, and you talked about email being ubiquitous and it being big business, but even just the fact that you can get high speed internet anywhere, everywhere. That's also helped driven this whole. It's in the cloud, so everybody has access to it all the time, and
Yeah.
the threats just keep getting more prevalent, more prevalent.
Absolutely.
Now, what about prescriptions? Any other side recommendations or other little takeaways for the audience today that they would find helpful?
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of the prescription there. Trust your provider, build a good stack as a provider, and then trust the partner. Take the threat seriously. That's I guess as good as prescription as well.
Wait. You said trust a partner and zero trust. Which is it? It can't be both ways, can it?
Good. Yeah, I like that. I'll put that on the board.
Okay. Well, I just
decide which partner to trust, and then
there you
trust
go.
them.
Okay. Trust your partner, just not your email.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
All right. Well, any other things that you can leave our audience with? I don't know if you knew this, but I've cultivated an audience that absolutely positively loves like free stuff. So are there any free resources or things you can turn us on to today that might be helpful?
Honestly, for the audience, I say no, because it's your provider's job to do this. Spend time building your business, providing the value you provide. Just like I wouldn't tell them to go figure out, what depreciation schedule their R&D or their, the tires on their, service trucks need to be on. Don't go figure out how to provide great service and a great product to the communities and the customers that are buying stuff from you, and let your professionals, that your trusted advisors figure this stuff out.
Gotcha. So now I figured out your secret formula. Now your secret formula is zero trust plus I got a guy equals secure.
There you go. I got a guy. And I'm sure there's an MSP out there whose name is I got a guy.
there probably is. It's probably a company who the owner's first name is Guy.
Oh, even better.
I actually do have a buddy, Guy Barone. I'll have to pitch that to him, see what he thinks
There
about
you
it.
go.
Maybe.
I've seen some creative ones.
Maybe I'll get credit for it.
Yeah.
See, I'm a big old science nerd, and I thought Fulcrum Group was perfect until I realized nobody but me and my co-members of Science Club knew what a fulcrum was.
Oh, what does it say? Well, the fulcrum's where you put the lever, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Give me who said give me the longest
Archimedes.
Lever and I can move the world?
Yeah, Archimedes.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I use that in my company presentation to new employees. I do kind of the history of Fulcrum and core values. I take like an hour and a half showing them our core values and stuff, but that's part of the conversation.
Awesome. That's fantastic.
All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end. I guess you don't have any resources that you want to share. I guess people don't want to reach out to you because you just told them, go get a guy.
Go get a guy. Get a guy.
Go get a guy. Go get a guy.
It's been awesome being here. I appreciate the time to chat and what you're doing for the whole community. It matters. It's important.
Well, I'm a big fan of high tide lifts all boats, and anyone we can help be more secure helps us all be more secure. Anything I can learn, anything I can pass on, any advice I can give to somebody. I always tell people I'm always ready to give, general information for free to anybody who asks. And, if we're trying to get really specific on something, that's really different. But I mean, a lot of that is because prior to me doing what I did, I had a lot of other people share with me and, just trying to make sure and pay it forward. I've had my cybersecurity, my CISSP over 20 years now. And I originally got it because someone who got certified before me said, I was consulting with them. They're like, hey, you really should look at this. And here's what I got from it. And go get this book and read it and, use your knowledge and you can pass it and stuff. And, it all started from somebody else. So I was trying to make sure that I do my part and pass it along to everybody else along the way.
Yeah. Fantastic. Awesome.
Well, great. Thank you for your time today, David. I always appreciate conversations with you and, kind of the sense of humor. And I don't know, you're not quite a Steve nerd, but you are in your own way. So
I get honorary membership.
I think we have equal membership, perhaps.
Fantastic.
If you want to reach out to me, you can always reach me at my email, the doctor spelled out, fulcrumgroup.net, or LinkedIn. If you reach out on LinkedIn, I normally only link up with people that I've met face-to-face or do business with. So if you try me on LinkedIn, make sure you let me know that you heard me on my podcast, and I'll link up with you. And that brings us to the end of the appointment. Wow, good stuff today. For me, my big takeaway from Dave was just that the, modern inbox threats are sneaky, but if you kind of have that zero trust mindset, then you're kind of going to be able to secure yourself, protect your employees from the bad stuff that goes on out there. So if you need help with that, feel free to reach out to us, but mainly subscribe to the Talk of the Doc podcast. I'm always looking for new topics, feedback, people who are interested in learning more. Help me out. Just talk to me about stuff. Leave me a review or share the episode with somebody else who might need fewer email fires and more focus. Anyways, I'm your host, Steve the Dr. Meek, and the doctor is out. See you next time. Thanks so much. Thanks, David.
Thanks. Good to be with you. Take care.